Okay, everybody here. I guess we better get this show going. All right. Welcome to the panel, Contemporary Health. I'm Molly Eberle. I serve on the board of the Thoreau Alliance and formerly of the Thoreau Farm Board. And you have 4 fantastic speakers today. As you know, we're going to start with Beverly. Beverly Pittman teaches cardiovascular disease prevention in the African American community, and she's a member of the Thoreau Society Board of Directors, and with that, of course, is merged, and she's on the Thoreau Alliance Board. And the topic of her presentation is Germ Theory, the Gateway from Henry David Thoreau to RFK Jr. Now, there's a connection for you, right? All right. Our second speaker is going to be Elizabeth. Elizabeth Scofield, speak of. She was a visiting associate at Harvard University for the academic year 04-05, currently enrolled in the MFA program at Dominican University in San Rafael, California. And her first book, Nordic Influence on Emerson's Self-Reliance, was published in November 2021. Topic that she's going to be addressing is comparing successful contemporary lifestyle elements to the flourishing community traditions in Thoreau's Concord.
And it's also with the blue zones. I changed the title.
And she's changed her title, but she'll tell you about that. Third, our speaker will be Katrina Boyd. She's a storyteller, and she's off telling a story right now. But when she shows up, we'll grab her. She's a disability advocate. She uses storytelling as a tool to educate, legislate, and maintain spiritual balance. Topic she's addressing is rejoicing during the storm. And our wrap-up speaker is Monica Cusick. And she curates and facilitates nature-based programs for seniors and adults with disabilities through a great group here in Concord called the Nature Connection. It's a local nonprofit. She's speaking on bringing the outdoors in, the power of nature-based wellness. We all need that. We're going to start with Beverly.
Good afternoon. Oh, it is working. As Molly said, my name is Beverly Pittman, and my topic today is Germ Theory, the Gateway from Henry David Thoreau to RFK Jr. I'm going to begin with, next slide please, I'm going to begin with a brief health history of the world and then segue into Henry's time. Some of the presentations we have seen so far have touched on some of the things in this presentation, and no doubt others will continue to do so. And I'm going to mention a few of the things I've heard along the way, and I can't mention them all because if I did, my co-panelists would not have time to talk. So here we go. In 1900, tuberculosis was the #1 killer in the world. In 2000, heart disease was the #1 killer and remains at the top along with cancer. How do we get from one to the other, and what has been done in response to them? Illness has been present from the very beginning of life as we know it, and both causes of disease have always been with us. Hippocrates is generally considered, last minute planning here. Not working? There we go. Hippocrates is generally considered the father of medicine, and his concepts of humoral and miasma medicine outlasted more spiritually based divine and demonic interpretations of disease. John Cusick discussed spiritual and physical health yesterday. Humoral medicine linked disease to the humors in the body, which are blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and miasma theory linked disease to bad air from decaying organic matter. People believed it was impossible to fight against spiritual sources of disease, but Hippocrates was able to demonstrate that the humors and miasma could be addressed. If you attended the opening plenary session on Wednesday, you heard Phyllis Cole discuss the use of humors, in particular bloodletting, among transcendentalist women. These practices continued with very little change until the beginnings of the discovery of germ theory, which claimed that infectious diseases were caused by unseen bacteria, viruses, and fungi, or microscopic germs. Next slide, please. There we go. The big three in the discovery and dissemination of germ theory were Louis Pasteur and his work with vaccinations and pasteurization of milk, Robert Koch, who won the Nobel Prize in 1905 for his work with tuberculosis, and Joseph Lister and his work with antiseptic measures such as washing hands before surgery as preventive medicine. As you can see, their lifetimes overlapped Henry's, so even though they did life-saving work, they, especially Robert Koch, could not benefit Henry. However, their and his overlapping interests created simultaneous awareness of the negative impact of urbanization on humans, albeit in different ways. Next slide, please. This slide depicts the major plagues and vaccines from the 1700s until now. In the 1700s, yellow fever, measles, and smallpox all occurred multiple times. In the 1800s, yellow fever still led the pack, smallpox was still with us, and in the 1900s, polio was the big devastation, but also a variety of influenzas. In the 2000s, we've had SARS, swine flu, Ebola, cholera, HIV, and the biggie, COVID-19. Vaccines followed accordingly. Smallpox variolation was discovered in 1795 and eradicated worldwide in 1977. The diphtheria vaccine is now given in combination with the tetanus and pertussis vaccines as the Tdap. Jonas Salk developed the polio vaccine in 1955, and while not yet eradicated, it's close. Finally, the measles vaccine was developed in 1963, and the disease was considered eradicated in 2000, but we are experiencing outbreaks now. The best way I can demonstrate the path of healthcare and germ theory from Thoreau's time until now is by tracing the creation and development of the role of the Surgeon General of the United States, also known as the People's Doctor, and the appointed leader of the United States Public Health Service. Todd Richardson referenced the Surgeon General in his presentation yesterday. The first Surgeon General was appointed in 1871, so there was no such person or position during Henry's lifetime. In fact, the first Surgeon General was not intended for the quote-unquote people as a whole, but for sick and disabled seamen. From then until the present, each Surgeon General platformed a particular area or two of disease. In the beginning, the focus was quite naturally on infectious diseases, with yellow fever being the first. One by one, we see the platforms change from infectious disease treatment to infectious disease prevention, sanitation, drinking water, pasteurized milk, and public education, and eventually to diminished importance. And by tracking the Surgeon Generals, we can see that infectious disease policy ended its descent after the 8th Surgeon General, and preventive health care started making its ascent with the 9th Surgeon General under JFK. With the 10th Surgeon General, we begin to see a focus on hospitals rather than individuals as part of cost containment. One more, and this is a very important point I want to make. There we go. Although this was considered standard, it does not mean that everyone was included. African Americans were historically and routinely excluded from care, mainly because they were considered naturally lazy and dirty animals, and emancipation was not yet a decade old. There were many race-based atrocities in healthcare, but none is more widely recognized than the Tuskegee syphilis study under the direction of the 5th Surgeon General, and it created a situation in this country that continues to exist today. In case you're not familiar, the Tuskegee syphilis study was the study of the effect of untreated syphilis on African American men. The study continued for 40 years, from 1932 until 1972, under the leadership of 7 Surgeon Generals, when it was exposed by a public health service whistleblower and made national headlines, because even though penicillin was known treatment for syphilis, it was withheld from the participants. Sorry, this is not moving. Okay. There we go. In 1997, President Bill Clinton formally apologized for the study, but African American awareness of the study has fostered mistrust of the healthcare system up to and including COVID, and its impact continues. Unfortunately, it is not the only example of mistreatment in research, and because of it, any person or organization wishing to conduct research on humans must first submit their work to an institutional review board for approval. Next slide, please. Okay. The first 10 Surgeon Generals were in place for almost a 100-year period. The second group were in place for a much shorter time and with different priorities. With the 11th Surgeon General and occupational safety and health, we see the impact of industrialization, and with the 12th Surgeon General, equity and access come into play. This is also when the first Healthy People report was published in 1980, perhaps with research indicating the extent of health disparities. These reports are the nation's strategic plan for the next decade. My time in the preventive healthcare field started with Healthy People 2000 and lasted through Healthy People 2010 and Healthy People 2020. Right now, we're operating under Healthy People 2030. Interestingly, C. Everett Koop, the 13th Surgeon General, has the quote-unquote distinction of being the last white male in the position, and every Surgeon General since him has been a person of color. Sorry about this. I'm trying to do two things. Okay. Koop was most known for addressing the AIDS epidemic, but for some reason, I most identify him with anti-smoking. Antonia Novello, the 14th Surgeon General, was both the first female and woman of color Surgeon General, and she platformed women's and children's health as well as minority health. Again, perhaps because of research, trends in preventive health and health disparities continue to grow. David Satcher, the 16th Surgeon General, had the most influence on my professional life. His Surgeon General report on physical activity and health was published in 1996, and a year later I started my doctoral program. Why is this thing not moving right? When Vivek Murthy became the 19th Surgeon General, he platformed a culture of prevention and with a major focus on walking. When President Biden appointed him as the 21st Surgeon General, he became the only person ever to serve Surgeon General twice. His second time around, he platformed loneliness and isolation, and I see many connections in his thought process and Thoreau's. And this brings us to RFK. Next slide, please. You're probably thinking, but he isn't Surgeon General, so how does this compare? Let me explain his story. For starters, he actually has something in common with Henry because he was concerned with environmental issues and his legal training and experience is in environmental law. However, he has no formal training or experience in healthcare, and his greatest claim to fame has been as a conspiracy theorist with regard to vaccines and autism as an outcome of pregnant women taking acetaminophen. MAHA, or Make America Healthy Again, is his healthcare plan for the nation. It has a checkered record, and I agree with some things, and I vehemently oppose others. For example, I agree that ultra-processed foods are bad for people and are a direct cause of obesity. I also agree with removing red and other colored dyes from foods. I agree, of course, with him following in his uncle's footsteps and focusing on physical activity, although I don't think that he and Pete Hegseth are the poster children for that. On the other hand, I don't agree with his position on childhood vaccines, and we already see what is happening with the measles outbreak. I especially disagree with his support of DOJ activities at HHS because a disproportionate number of people impacted by it have been highly trained African American women, many at the PhD level. Historically, the middle and upper middle classes among African Americans have been comprised of, quote, preachers, teachers, and nurses. Most of these women who were dismissed as DEI hires, most of these women were dismissed as DEI hires despite their training and expertise. I wonder who can be any more DEI than the people in the office in the current administration. Perhaps the most egregious of all his decisions is the United States withdrawal from the World Health Organization. That decision alone disconnected us from important global information and created harm for many poorer countries that depend on the US for support for healthcare. Lastly, who is the current Surgeon General? Okay. Now you understand why he's on here. Finally, I had planned to end with the words of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I saw in Philadelphia last October. Tyson said, in the earliest years of human presence on Earth, when humans still lived in caves, life expectancy was 30 years, so by 30, half the population had already died. By 1840, when humans were eating nutritiously and walking regularly, life expectancy had only risen to 35. It was only through science, i.e. germ theory, that life expectancy increased. Given that perspective, Henry's death at such a young age is a little more understandable, albeit still painful. Henry's growing interest in Charles Darwin, I believe that had he lived, he would have seen more writing. We would have seen more writing along scientific lines. I've also included a list of sources. Oh, next. I've also included a list of sources if you would like to delve into this a bit more. And one of these John mentioned yesterday in his talk, John Green, who we've tried to get here, and I think we should still keep trying. But it's a fantastic book, so if you get a chance, read it. However, I arrived in Concord this past Sunday, and after settling in, I opened my laptop and started reading the news. And there in the New York Times was an article titled, "Has Maha Given Up?" Not necessarily surprising, it covered many of the things I discuss here. For example, and I quote, "At present, there is no confirmed head for the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention or of the Food and Drug Administration. There is no Surgeon General and no head of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease. There is also no confirmed boss for the FDA's Center for Biologic Evaluation and Research, which regulates vaccines, and none at its Center for Drugs Evaluation and Research, which oversees drug therapies. Last year, staffing at the Department of Health and Human Services was reduced by 25%, leaving huge deficits of personnel and expertise. The agency looks less like an army of acolytes than a barren bureaucracy. This is not an overhaul. This is an evacuation, a disemboweling," quote unquote. So what has RFK given us in terms of population health? What has Maha given us that replaces the extensive healthcare system already in place? It isn't perfect, and where's Katrina? Has she gotten here yet? If Katrina gets here, she's going to give you something to think about when she presents. But to me, RFK seems to have set us back in many ways. And just as infectious disease and chronic illnesses switch places in the past, there's the possibility of them switching back to the original order. Without needed measures in place, that could indeed be disastrous for us all. But all is not last. My panel mates, Elizabeth and Monica, are going to share exciting happenings with you. Thank you.
Should be able to, yeah, should be just fine. I am left-handed, so it's all good. We're good. All right. Hooray, okay. Okay, so hello. So my name is Elizabeth Scofield, and several years ago, everybody can hear me? Yeah, okay. I wrote a book detailing the research that I conducted while I was in graduate school over 20 years ago. This is the book. It is recently been added to the book collection at the shop at Walden Pond, so it's now available there. Thank you, China. So I did the original research and the primary sources that I used for that research as well. And I was advised to publish it as a personal narrative, which I did. The first part of the book is a play-by-play memoir of the personal journey I took following the research around the globe. And the second part is the research itself. The topic was Ralph Waldo Emerson and the influence that Nordic mythology had on him early on in his studies, which then was influential in his later writings as well. During the last 5 years of my research, I spent a lot of time in Concord, and I volunteered at the Old Manse. So I was pretty familiar with Concord, Massachusetts during the time of the Transcendentalists. While I was living in San Diego in 2014, I was diagnosed with an aggressive case of psoriatic arthritis. The rheumatologist prescribed a biologic medicine to manage the inflammation, which I hated. After a year on the medicine, I was determined to get off of it. I thought there must be a way to stop the inflammation by stopping it at the source, or even before it had a chance to turn into inflammation, by eliminating the cause of it. So after much research, I read in multiple places that a gluten-free, paleo or Mediterranean diet could dramatically reduce inflammation in the biological system. Therefore, reducing or even eliminating the need for any sort of drug. No processed foods, only grass-fed, organic fruits and vegetables, nuts, beans, and rice. So I tried that, and lo and behold, it worked. I was able to get off of Eberle and not need to go on it again, since the foods that exasperated my immune system were no longer being consumed. This started my interest into healthy eating and healthy lifestyle. I began researching for more ways to live a life in which I thrived, and ways I could live a healthy life for a long time. This is when I discovered the Blue Zones. So this is the original book. It's now become a worldwide phenomenon. And I just want to show you this one very quickly because it makes a difference. It's so much of a phenomenon that now we have books, or there are books that are available, that have nothing to do with it. The disclaimer is this is an independently published and unofficial workbook, not affiliated, authorized, approved, or licensed by the subject book authors or publishers. And this was from Amazon. So it's become a big thing. Okay. Let me see. The Blue Zones are placed in the world, are places in the world that have been identified as having most people who live over 100 than other places in the world. Originally, there were 5 such spots identified in the world. Okinawa, if I mispronounce these, please let me know. Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Ikaria, Greece, and Loma Linda, California. A 6th Blue Zone, Singapore, was added just recently. Dan Buettner conducted the research in conjunction with National Geographic. The places are called Blue Zones simply because the researchers used a blue pen to mark the places where they exist. The original one was in Italy, which is where he started. What surprised me so much, when I looked at the attributes and the lifestyle habits and methods of the people who lived in the identified Blue Zones, I recognized much of the activities and methodologies as being very similar to those who had lived in Concord, Massachusetts in the times as the transcendentalists. I recognized this because of the research I had conducted regarding citizens of Concord, Massachusetts 20 years ago. So it's tapped into knowledge that I already knew about. I simply did not know those exact attributes are what make people live longer. Items such as gardening and walking and sitting and talking with friends and reading all attributed to a life that was joyfully lived, which then attributed to a longer life, according to the research. There are 4 headings and 12 subheadings, which I will take from the Blue Zones research and cross-compare them to the lifestyles of those who lived in the 19th century Concord, Massachusetts, at the time of Henry. Section 1 is eat wisely, plant-based, and moderation. So very little processed food, if any, grass-fed beef, naturally made and baked bread, lots of freshly picked berries of a variety, and vegetables from the gardens. Beans, lots of beans. Bronson Alcott also promoted a plant-based diet as well. Section 2 is moved more naturally by hand, walking and gardening. As we know, they didn't have a whole lot of machines at the time, so everything was done by hand. Making clothes, cleaning rugs, they had to take the rug out and beat it to get the dust out. Washing clothes. Thoreau built his cabin at Walden Pond. I don't think there were any forklifts at that time. Cooking, baking breads and cakes. Grass-fed animals needed to be cooked, or killed first, then cooked, then brought to table. Gardening was a large time, taking activity and moving naturally. Very few were running 26-mile marathons at that time. They were walking to and from each other's houses and Walden Pond instead. Thoreau planted a garden outside the Old Manse for Nathaniel Hawthorne as a wedding present. There were no elevators, there were no clothes washers, clothes dryers, there were no Roomba vacuum cleaners. The modern bicycle was much later in 1885. Section 3 is the outlook and faith and purpose. They would wake up in the morning with a sense of purpose, whether that be writing, lecturing, invigorating thoughts, or simply going for a walk or tending to the garden. There was the improvement of life and how to live it. Most had positive outlooks and the desire to share ideas. Reading and producing lectures to be given to audiences, then books to be written and distributed. Homes to clean, children to be raised, going for walks for thought and relaxation, and going for hikes in the woods. Church and worship were also part of the ingredients, promoting elevated thought and writing and spreading these ideas, such as the collaborative effort of producing the Dial magazine. Section 4 is connecting family and first partnership and having the right, they call it the right tribe, the right people that you identify with. So we have like-minded people and neighborhood in that community. Part of the atmosphere of Concord was that the neighbors were all within walking distance or even just across the street. There was a community, a feeling of support for one another. There was family and children, extended families. We had Aunt Mary, Moody Emerson. They were all priorities within the community of Concord. They had similar beliefs of what the Beth methodologies and tactics of living, so there was a built-in support for each other. The Transcendentalists were the right tribe for each other in belief and community support. So I have been talking about this for the past week or so with other participants, and a lot of questions have come up, which has been great because I got to add it to my presentation. One aspect that came up in conversation, well, is this really true and can the concepts be applied? And I believe this actually supports the theory even more. Thank you for your presentation, by the way, because you had a lot of tuberculosis on there, and that made a big difference. People who did not succumb to tuberculosis actually lived fairly long lives. Ralph Waldo Emerson lived until 79. Lydia Emerson lived until age 90. Ezra Ripley lived until age 90. Mary Moody Emerson lived until 89. Bronson Alcott lived until age 88. And even Longfellow, although he was in Cambridge, lived till age 75. There were lots of people who died from tuberculosis and very young. Henry David Thoreau died at age 44. His sister Helen died at age 37. Ellen Emerson, Emerson's first wife, died at age 19. William Emerson, Emerson's father, died at age 42, and the list goes on. There was an article in 2015 by the Concord Free Library staff member, Constance Manoli-Skoke. If I mispronounced that, please let me know. Regarding the tuberculosis in Concord during the 19th century, and that might provide more information on this. One more thing to note is that the blue zones listed here are for the most part in moderate climates. Very little snowfall in Loma Linda, California, in Icaria, Greece, in Costa Rica, in Okinawa, Japan, or in Singapore. Sardinia, Italy does get some snow higher up in the mountains, but none of these places compare to the New England winters. Another thing to note, that I was in a conversation with someone yesterday, and they said, do you know about all the information that's disproving what the blue zones are? And there's a criticism, and my response is, you know what? My presentation was to cross and compare. Someone else can take the criticism and do 2.0 next year. This is a great way to start, so I'd like to start the ball rolling. Anybody else who wants to bring it in? Great, happy to collaborate, but it wasn't part of what I was doing in the first place. Steve Jobs famously said, you can't connect the dots going forward. You can only connect the dots going backwards. And so because I had studied this 20 years ago, when I was researching the blue zones, it was just ping, ping, ping. Oh, this is just like. Nobody had washing machines or Roombas or any of that. They did it all by hand, and everything was organic, no processed foods. Okay. So how can this idea contribute to the future for this kind of study? Well, many people want to start living like Thoreau, simplify, or at least in that time period. I remember the scenes from the movie Wall-E, where the people are moving around and people moving chairs. It's Pixar, I hope someone has seen it. Their bodies look like potatoes, and their muscles are weak from non-use. This somewhat looks like the future we might slowly be moving towards as a society because we are inventing more and more tools of convenience and machinery to make our lives easier. AI is now being applied in many ways, and many of the inventors are now being redundant. They're losing their jobs. We can start doing more things by hand instead of having everything automated for us. And we can study how things were done in Thoreau's time, more gently and more steadily. Making more time for walking, not just for the exercise, but for all the other benefits that it allows, such as gathering one's thoughts. Sorry? Oh. We can write down how people in Thoreau's time completed everyday tasks without machinery and start doing these things in that way today. We can take the Blue Zones comparisons to other historical towns that are nearby, such as Lexington and Arlington, and cross-compare with them as well. We can start community gardens, more in-person book clubs and volunteer efforts, and dinner parties and picnics, and become as sociable as possible with a higher purpose, not only to enjoy each other's company and intellectual insights, but also knowing, hey, this just might help me live longer. The Thoreau Society Annual Gathering is actually a very Blue Zone activity. It's a gathering of like-minded people, find the right tribe, who come together in person and spend time with each other, exchange knowledge, thoughts, and ideas, and participate in a community garden which benefits not only the volunteers, but also the recipients of the food that the garden produces. There are a few social hours that encourage a little alcohol consumption, but not to excess. In a sense, the Thoreau Alliance is promoting longevity and thriving simply in its practice of organizing a week-long gathering of like-minded citizens, waking up each day with a purpose and reiterating that purpose for the common good. Thank you very much.
All right, I